Hello and welcome to the Fedora Files. I am Gregory Fedora, and with me is my favorite guest so far, Lisa Gregory. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. I had so much fun last time
Oh, yeah, it
that I
was a
begged you
blast.
to have me on again.
Well, you had something to share, so I was like, I definitely had to have you on again. And like last time we talked about your journalism and how you got into that.
Mhm,
And this time it's fiction writing, but not
mhm.
just it's historical fiction writing, which is a whole different beast. I mean, it's one
Right.
thing to write fiction, it's another to write historical fiction, but then you're centered around like one of the probably the most mystical mystique battles in the continental United States, Gettysburg.
Mhm.
And like people like it's kind of romanticized, I guess you could say that. I mean, I don't know if that's the best word for it, but it's one of those where like when I see like the movie Gettysburg or Civil War things,
Mhm.
Gettysburg
Mhm.
is always such a central part of every documentary about the Civil War, every because it was a huge deal. I mean,
Right.
I believe it was the most lives lost
Yes.
in the Civil War was at Gettysburg. And I've
Mhm.
been there multiple times. I've done ghost tours there. I've done all kinds of stuff. And it's pretty hallowed and just there is a feel about the whole town.
There
Like when you
really
go,
is.
yeah.
There
And
really
so
is.
before we get into your story though, I just want to, how did you get interested in Gettysburg at, the town and the history of it?
Well, I live in Tawnytown, Maryland, which is 20 minutes, 15 minutes away from Gettysburg. And I am a journalist, but I've always been interested in fiction writing, creative fiction writing. So I joined a writers group through one of the editors I'd met for one of the magazines I write for. And they are located in Gettysburg. They're called the Gettysburg Writers Brigade. And every so often they put together an anthology, and I was in the last anthology. There's been 3 of them so far. I was in the last one, but I just kind of stuck my toe in. And this time with the third one, I wrote a story and I really did a deep dive. So in order to be in the anthology, it has to be tied in, whether it's historically, modern day, somehow it has to be connected with Gettysburg. So that's kind of how that happened.
Okay. Now your story was unique. Like when I found out about, I bought it. I have it right here. For those of you
Yay!
who want a cool book, it's called On Hallowed Ground, and it's on Amazon. That's where I got it.
Right, it is.
It's probably other places too, but it is a good read. It's really cool. And your story was the very first one, which is
Mhm,
like it kind of to me that set up the whole book. Uh,
mhm.
because like yours was the first one, like yours was going to be the first one I read anyway, but
Right.
then because I
But
was like,
we took care of that for you.
yeah, like I turned, it's like, oh, introduction, then oh, here's yours, and Avram's brother is the story. I
Right.
don't want to give anything. I'll let you give away what you want to give away. But I loved it because I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I mean, I love Gettysburg, I love the history, but I like the way your story was about the effect of Gettysburg on the families that weren't there and
Mhm.
the extended effect. And like a lot of times we don't think about that. We think about the battle itself, the lives lost, but we don't think about how that affected the people who weren't there.
Right.
And I liked I've thought it was fascinating, the whole thing, and like the two brothers and the family dynamic and how you really got into like that whole thing. And how did you, I mean, give away what you want to give away, but
Okay, I
how did,
appreciate
I don't want to give away anything because I want people to read it. But
that.
how did you come up with the idea for your take on this?
Well, I walk every day. I walk 3 miles every day, and I walk around a pond up from my neighborhood. And one day I was walking by and I thought, I'd really like to contribute a short story for the anthology, but it's a little intimidating. And I am among some incredibly talented writers. We have people that have published 30 books. We have a Western fiction writer who's been compared to Louis L'Amour. I mean, we have some really, so that's kind of intimidating stuff. And both of those are in this current anthology, Mark Greathouse and Jim Rada. But I was walking around the pond and I happened to walk by honeysuckle.
Mhm.
And it was such a strong sense of it. And I thought, how often we're so busy, we're so consumed by what's going on in our lives that we miss out on the small joys.
Mhm.
And for some reason, it came to me, someone who's sort of been distracted emotionally all of his life. In his early 80s, he really smells honeysuckle for the first time. And then that got me to thinking about the trauma.
Mhm.
We tend to put Civil War heroes and people on a pedestal, but there was a lot of just regular people, as you referenced. And what did that do to those people?
Mhm.
And so I was also working on an article about opioid, magazine article about opioid addiction in Civil War veterans, which was our first epidemic with opioids. Everyone thinks it's this one, but it's not,
Yeah.
the current one. And finally, I pulled a lot from family lore and stories. A lot of things in this. The story of Whymper and his mule is a true story in my family.
Oh, really?
Yeah, except he shot the mule. I didn't include that. The attempted, the fellow that was injuring himself to get morphine is a true
Mhm.
story. It happened in my family
Wow.
generations ago. So as I'm thinking about how I want to write this story, it just came pouring out. And I kind of felt like my ancestors were sort of whispering in my ear. You know what I mean? Tell your
Yeah.
story. You know what we did and how we lived. So a lot of it is things I heard growing up.
Yeah, that's cool. And well, and it was, I mean, like I said, it was really, it drove me. And I messaged you about Whymper,
Mhm.
and I think you need to do a sequel about him and his life, because I just want to know what his recipe was for moonshine. And because you
You and
made,
my husband.
yeah, but
There.
I did, I love the how, like you say, you touched on all these different aspects. Again, I don't want to give anything away, but like all these different characters and what they were going through and how the war affected them. And I said, like, I'm big into history. I love history. I love the stories. I love that. But a lot of times, like, honestly, I never really thought about the effect it
Mhm.
had on families at all. Like like I said, I think about the heroes and the battles, and I'm like,
I think
man, that
we
was
all
an
do.
amazing, yeah, it's an amazing battle, and how
Mhm.
this courier got shot, so then
Mhm.
the Union won. And
Mhm.
it's like these little, and like that. But then I don't think about, well, that courier got shot, and he had a family, and
Mhm.
how did that, and like he got buried in a mass grave. They never got to see it,
Mhm.
and that is traumatic for people. Like, when someone passes away, like, and not being able to know where that person ended up,
Mhm.
that holds a lot, that weighs families down when they're unable to put a grieve properly or put it to rest.
Mhm.
And you
Absolutely.
and you showed that in your story, how that affected all these things. And it was like, and it was a great read, because like I read through it pretty quick. Like
Mhm.
I got like, usually when I get scared to tell someone I'm gonna read their stuff, because then I'm one of these
I
where
know. I
if it
know.
doesn't get me, then I'm like, oh no. And I told them I'd read this, and I'm like,
And you were having
uh,
me on your
yeah,
podcast,
yeah. And
and
I was like,
this
oh
could get
no.
awkward really
Yeah,
quick.
it's like, okay, I know the name of the story. No,
Yeah.
it's like, but then I was like, but it was good. It was neat to me, because I was like reading. I got through it
Mhm.
like the first time I sat down. So there you go. Like
Good,
I got through
good.
the whole thing, and then and all the characters, like I said, were really well put together.
Good.
But now I was curious, how did you find out about the Writers Brigade? How did you stumble upon
Oh,
them?
well, as I
I'm curious
mentioned
about it.
earlier, an editor for a magazine I was writing for was a member, Jim Rada, actually, the fellow who's written 30 books.
Hmm.
And he said, I belong to this writers group. Why don't you show up? And I said, I'm not that kind of writer. I'm a journalist, because he does both. He's
Hmm.
everywhere doing everything. And he goes, it doesn't matter, you're a writer. And so I was sort of sitting in the background, taking it all in. And I think I probably joined a year or two before the pandemic. But the wonderful thing about that group is they're not judgmental. They're very encouraging. You learn a lot. We have a topic every week. We meet weekly at O'Rourke's in Gettysburg. And I really felt like they encouraged me and nurtured me to be brave enough. This is not easy to put yourself, it's one thing to be a journalist and write
Yeah.
about a topic you're given. A lot of this was quite personal.
Mhm.
So I owe them a huge debt of gratitude.
That's very cool. And like I said, like I said, I've written stories, but my stuff is I make up everything, so it's a lot
Mm.
easier. But then doing something that's grounded in a historical thing, that's a little bit harder because you gotta really think about those things more. So it takes a lot more time. I
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay.
We actually have had those discussions in the group. Is it easier to do historical fiction? Because we have fantasy writers, we have just all, ghost story writers, everything, and historical fiction. Is it easier to create a fictional world within a world that really existed, history, or to start from scratch and create a whole new world? In my opinion, I would think what you do is harder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
for for me,
Kudos to you.
yeah. Well, for me, it's kind of the opposite because I think like I've tried to do a historic, like I'm working on
Mhm.
one, and I don't want to get into it, but I'm working on one, and it's very different because
Interesting.
yeah, because I'm trying to keep it true to that time period because again, it actually does take place during the Civil War, but has nothing to do with the Civil War. But
Interesting.
it's in that time period. But I'm trying to think. I'm researching. I've called a bunch of people in the area asking about real individuals. So they're probably like, "What is this guy doing?" He's asking like, "Who was the pastor of this church in 1860?" And they're like, like so. Then I've gotten worried. Can I use their names? I mean,
Yeah.
it's been over 100 years, but can I use that or change it enough that but like those are the things I worry about with
Do
historical
you
fiction.
enjoy? Do you enjoy the research aspect
Yeah,
of
I
it?
do.
Yeah, I do
It's
too.
fun. It's fun
Yeah.
that and people are very nice about telling you stuff, and you know and I'm just like, then one of the names was very similar to a friend's name, so I asked him, I go, "Hey, by any chance are you related to this person?" And he's like, "Yeah, actually that was my great grandfather." I was like,
You
all
never
right.
know, do
And
you?
then I was like, yeah, I was like, well, I'm thinking of using them in a story. Would your family care? He's like, nah, we wouldn't care. That'd be awesome. And so I was like,
You
I
just,
go, well,
yeah,
check
you
with the
never
rest of
know.
your family and just
Yeah,
before I
yeah.
do it. But
Well, I didn't share a lot of these family stories until I became a certain age. The
mhm,
people, a
they,
lot of my close relatives have passed on. So
yeah,
there's a little bit more freedom. And it's not all based. There's a lot that I
yeah.
created from scratch. But it certainly sort of helped guide it, you
Yeah.
know. So
So are you working on another story?
I've been thinking about that. I've had a couple of people suggest that Avram's brother should be a novel. They felt
Oh, I
like
could see that.
there was more that they wanted to know about the other characters. That's an intimidating process. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm up to the challenge. And then if another story comes to me, I certainly have enjoyed it,
Yeah.
really, truly.
Well, I could see that, like the story you're doing, like Abrams, his saga or tale
Mhm.
could definitely be a novel. It actually could be a movie. Like it's got that feel, like that there's a broader. And the thing is, like, if you think about this is just my own take on things. Stephen King's stories, usually his short stories make better movies than his novels. And
Mhm.
so,
You're not the first
so
person to say that, that I've
like
heard say that.
right.
Yeah.
Like I love the movies that were of his that were short stories that turned into a movie. I was like, they were fascinating. But then like his longer books, like
Yeah.
there's some I guess they just because I guess the book has so much
Yeah.
that that when you turn into a movie, you lose a lot. Whereas the short story, when it turns into a movie, expands it more. And then you're like, oh, okay, that's really awesome. So
It
I love
adds
that.
to it. Maybe he should
Yeah.
have been a script writer,
Yeah, maybe.
you know,
Yeah.
instead of instead of writing, you know, these big novels. I did bring some things to read from the short story. I can read a
Yeah.
passage if
Please.
you
Yeah,
like.
please do.
It's
Yeah,
your
that would be awesome.
show,
No,
you
I'd
know, it's
love to
your, I don't
hear
want
it.
to,
Yeah. See, like, well, like that's what I said. I wanted you to share what you wanted to, because I said, like, I could have sat here and just read the whole short story, and then my people have been like, they've been like, that's great, but then they wouldn't have bought your book because they would have already heard the story. But there's other stories in it too,
yes, there are.
of
There
other
are,
authors.
and a variety, romance, ghost stories, as I keep
Yeah.
repeating, historical
Yeah,
fiction.
yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah,
It's
and
very
again,
cool.
some really, really talented, talented people.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I will read a passage. As a little bit of background, it's a story of a man who loses his brother at the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, that whole society following the war went through severe trauma, and how it would manifest itself with different people. He felt like he was always living in his brother's shadow, and in fact, his brother wasn't the only one that lost his life at the Battle of
Mhm.
Gettysburg, even though he was still living. My brothers and sisters were laid to rest at the far end of our yard with 5 little crosses marking their graves. I sometimes saw my mother head to those little crosses when Avram and my father were working in the fields or had gone into town and she was alone. Hello, my little loves, she would say cheerfully as she sat on the ground before the crosses, her skirt billowing around her. She looked as if she were a nursery school teacher with her class of the dead. She told them Bible stories and sang them nursery rhymes. She would stop sometimes and stroke the grass that sprouted up from their graves with delicate fingers as if caressing the chubby, dimpled arm or leg of a toddler. In my place hiding under the porch, I would close my eyes, gather up my knobby knees to my chest, and pretend she was telling stories and singing to me. But she never did. As I grew older, I began to realize that it wasn't that my mother didn't want to love me, but that she couldn't. I would sometimes catch her looking at me with a puzzled and, dare I say it, annoyed expression on her face. By the time of my own birth, Avram was already growing into young manhood. He had beat the fate of our siblings. I was still growing. I often wondered if by loving me, she would risk losing me. Who was I? Who was this intruder? The page here. And how long would I stay before I too joined the row of little crosses? So both she and my pa put all their love, hopes, and dreams into Abram. After my brother went away to fight and died, I was more like a shadow than a real boy. I lurked around my parents and within call if they needed something, say a chore, but just out of the way of hearing a tearful sigh from my mother or feeling a strong fist my father planted against my cheek as the object of a rage I wasn't responsible for but took the brunt of. My mom took to her bed after getting the news about Abram, and shortly after she emerged, she found her way to the little line of crosses in the yard. In fact, she went there even more than before. That was until my pa came upon her unexpectedly one day. From my viewpoint under the porch, I had seen him standing off to the side of the yard as he watched her quietly. I shuddered. He was scrunching up his eyes in that way he did when he was a mite mad. God damn it, woman, I heard him suddenly bellow as he stomped over to her. I pulled my knees closer to my chest and lowered my head as if preparing for a blow myself and cowered farther back into the shadows underneath that porch. Stop this foolishness, stop it now, I heard him yell as he grabbed her by the arm and drug her up the steps and into our house. She was blubbering her apologies between deep, heart-wrenching sobs. Just miss the little soul, she said to him as he violently pushed her through the door. Miss my babies, miss my Abram. Where is he? My boy buried somewhere all alone and forgotten. He should be here lying beside his brothers and sisters. Not a few minutes later, my pa came out of the house swinging an axe. He went over to the row of little wooden crosses and plunged the axe deep into each and every one of them, splintering them to pieces. Knew this wasn't a good idea, he said in heavy breaths as he rose the axe over his head and down again and again. When the last little wooden cross had been shattered to smithereens, he stopped and wiped the sweat from his eyes, still heaving to catch his breath. Boy, he shouted, boy, where are you? I know you're slinking around here somewhere, always hovering like a damn ghost. Get over here and help me pick up this wood for kindling. That night I watched as he stacked the fire in our fireplace high with the kindling from the little wooden crosses. I couldn't help but wipe a tear or two from my grubby cheek as I sat in the glow of the fire and watched my brothers and sisters go up in smoke. Now they too were as gone from me as Avram, whose remains were so far away on that battlefield at Gettysburg.
Yeah, that was like one of the scenes that, like, when I read it, I was like, I envisioned it, and that was like such a crazy moment because you see the heartbreak of the mom and Augustus, and
Mm,
but then even the father, like I mean, he's dealing with his own grief in his own way, and
mhm,
he just goes a different route of it, and it's just, you're just like, I actually was, in my head, I went the darker route. I thought he's gonna kill the mom with the axe. I like That's what I thought this was going. I was like, oh my gosh, this is taking a turn. And then but then it went that way, and I was just like, okay, at least that
maybe that should have been the way. I mean, I don't
no,
know.
no, I'm glad it didn't, because I was like, because then you could still kind of, even though the dad had his rough side, you could still kind of empathize with him. You could kind of feel like I could understand kind of what he was doing and what he was going through and why he was the way he was. And you really showed that, like, because at first you're like, well, why would they do that to, like,
Mhm,
the brother, the younger brother? Why? But then when you realize the trauma, like, they've lost so many of their children, and now they've lost the one that they really thought,
mhm,
hey, he made it through adolescence, he's gonna be good, and then he dies in war, and then now they just, they're at the point now, they're like, they don't want to invest in
mhm.
this last one, because it's like we keep losing them. And then by
And you
doing
get
that,
it. Yeah.
yeah. And then by doing that, they lose him. And so,
Mhm. Yeah,
like,
yeah.
because
It's a bit of a emotional
yeah,
conundrum.
yeah,
But you feel sympathy for these people, but I would hope readers would also be a little irritated.
yeah,
And how we don't always reach for the joy that's in front of us.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like we don't, and then but we in our mind, we'll watch somebody else and be like, I would never do that. But then we're not in
Mhm.
that situation. But then we're in a different situation where someone were to watch how we do something, they'd be like, I would never do that. It's like I think about that all the time. Like I read stories, or like, watch a movie. I'm like, yeah, that the guy's an idiot. I'd never do that. And then like I do something really idiotic, and now I'm like thinking, I go, there's somebody out there that's saying right now they would never do that. And I
Well,
go,
my husband will often say with certain movies, well, why are they doing that? Why don't they do blah, blah, blah? And I'll turn to him and say, well, it's called storytelling, my dear.
yeah,
You're not
yes,
going to have the story if you
yeah,
cut to the chase or fix the problem.
yeah, right away.
Um, yeah. And when I wrote this short story, I was hoping that it would be as relevant emotionally with his stories about addiction and
Hmm.
physical abuse, domestic abuse, and also at the end, hope and forgiveness,
Yeah,
healing for him. Um, but I think it touches, because at the end of the day, we may be hundreds, thousands of years apart, but we're all humans.
yeah,
We're
and,
connected.
and we all go through some kind of trauma, whether
Hmm.
it may not be to that extent, but there are things that have affected us, and there are things where we do have to forgive, and
Hmm.
I think that's one of the message of your story is, like, if you don't forgive, it just tears you down,
Hmm.
and you see that through the story of his plight, and then he meets somebody, again, don't want to give it away, that helps him kind of
Hmm.
move on from this. But like, you see what unforgiveness and anger and hate and all this does to you, and resentment, and and that's something, like, I've had to deal with, like, with family members, friends, like, they do, and usually family's the ones that really, like, hurt you the most, like, they, because
Hmm.
because they know
Mhm.
you. They know it's always the people that know you the best that hurt you the most. And
They know
so,
your Achilles
yeah,
tendon.
yeah,
They know.
they know how to really
Yeah,
push that button. And then
yeah.
you gotta decide, okay, I'm gonna move on from this. I'm gonna, you gotta be like, you know what, it's not worth it. And that's something I try and tell my kids. It's like, you know what, these are always gonna be your brothers and sisters. I'm always gonna be your dad, so you gotta figure it out, no matter what you do, I'm still your dad and you're always my kid. So we
Well,
gotta like work on this.
I well, parenting is the hardest thing if you're committed to it and really try to do it right. It's probably the hardest thing you will ever do in your life and the
Oh
most
yeah.
important and the most joyful. But I thought it was important to show him remembering his big brother
Yeah.
and the way they related at the end. I think
Hmm.
we become so consumed with what we're unhappy about, what we're frustrated, we forget those moments.
Yeah.
And I think that enabled him to sort of tear down the wall. I can read a short piece on Whimper if you like. You seem to like
I
Whimper.
liked Whimper. I liked his story. He was a great interjection, and his story is kind of, to me, was hilarious yet tragic at the
Mhm.
same time. And I was like, I loved it. I was like just his crescendo. I was like, that's beautiful. Like that was like it may yeah, if you want to read Whimper, like, because
It's
Whimper is,
not very long, and you
I know
let me know if we're taking too much time
no,
or
I
if
want to
you
hear.
know.
I love Whimper. Whimper
I
is a
knew you liked
side character
Whimper.
that just is in it just briefly, but he's a spotlight to me. I thought he was
I
great.
liked him, and I thought
Yeah.
I needed him because there's some levity there,
Yeah.
even though his ending is not.
Yes.
Paul's Paul's favorite drinking buddy was Whimper. Folks said Whimper got his name because he was born whimpering and not squalling like most babies. Had weak lungs, they said, and he would be known to have coughing fits and lose his breath, but he made good shine. The whole area swore by Whimper's moonshine. When my pa and Whimper got to drinking and talking, Whimper always, and I mean always, told the story about his old one-eyed mule Helen and a failed delivery of shine. I was taking shine into town, he would say as he began the familiar story at my father's urging. Had the mason jars strapped up on Helen really good and the side bags. In town, he had to stop at the courthouse to take care of business, he said with a grin. He had tethered Helen up to the post outside the courthouse. Well, I guess old Helen got tired of waiting while I was doing my business inside, he would say as his grin grew bigger. Whimper came out to see that Helen had decided to lie down and roll back and forth in the dust of the road, as animals are wont to do. Probably working out an itch, I figured. Broke every one of my damn bottles of shine, Whimper would say, slapping his knee. Damn stream of shine trickling down the dirt road and turning that dust to mud. My own little stream of shine. The tube men would then hee-haw before taking another slug of drink. I guess Whimper wasn't too worried. He could always make more, and a good story could be worth its weight in shine. Not a bad investment, as Whimper certainly told it often enough. Whimper would be dead just a few years later. He was making a special delivery to a man who was not at home at the time, and Whimper was shot to death when the husband came home unexpectedly and caught Whimper crawling out of the couple's bedroom window. The community mourned his loss, of course, but I'm not so sure in doing so they were mourning the loss of the man as much as his shine. Whimper made some mighty fine shine, folks would say. Real shame, they would say.
Yeah, I love that. See, and for me, this is what I envisioned of Whimper. I envisioned Val Kilmer from Tombstone playing Doc Holliday, and
Did you really?
that is how I envisioned him. Like I don't know. I just that's when I was reading. That's who I envisioned playing him, a young Val Kilmer of, or maybe not so young, but like the
Yeah,
Doc
in his
Holliday type.
prime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But Doc Holliday, Val Kilmer. And that's what, like, in my head, that's where I was going with it. I was like, so it just made me laugh because I could envision the whole, like, the way he swaggered and all that good
Yeah,
stuff.
I like to think that even though he was born a little weaker in a culture where men were so expected to be manly, he had this issue with his lungs, but he still kind of lived life to its fullest.
Yeah.
He had this gusto, and I come up from generations of people who had moonshine stills, and that was a real status thing in the mountains among your community if you make good shine.
So he was king.
He was king, not very long.
Yeah, but for a while.
He got his
but that
head
happens.
turned.
That happens to kings. They get dethroned. It happens. An angry knight, It's like Sir Lancelot and King Arthur, I think it was the other way around.
Window. Yep.
Yeah, I think it was Sir Lancelot who was crawling out of the bedroom window in that story, but whatever. You get, talking about. Like, I have too many stories in my head.
You need to go back and work on that book. You should come to the writers group.
I might have to.
We'd love to have you.
We
are in Gettysburg, but
it's only 45 minutes. I could make that. It's not.
We would love to. And you will be very welcomed after doing this, because
definitely, I will definitely have to see when I can do it. And I would love to come at least sit in on one time and see what it's all like. That'd be fun.
Like I said, it's wonderful. And it's been a really wonderful experience for me. And I wanted to add, if you don't mind, that the proceeds that we make from the anthologies, we donate them. And we made one of the largest, I'm going to read this so I get it right, largest non-organizational donations to the Gettysburg Educational Foundation for Writing and Reading. And the money went to high school students so they could participate in writing competitions. How cool is that?
That's awesome. That's very cool. So you're giving back.
Yeah.
Now I know you're busy and you got things to do and stuff, but I want to remind everybody, here it is, the book. It's on Hallowed Ground. Short stories about the most famous small town in America. And I'm saying it is good. The first story is amazing. I'm going to say that right. That writer is on fire. And then
not prejudiced at all, are you? Not,
I'm halfway through the book. So I read yours first and then I kept reading, but then I got busy with life. So it's like, I'm about halfway through now. But I will finish it because all of them are so good. Like the ones I've read so far, like none of them are like skip it. It's like they're all really good so far. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. And I'm gonna send it to my son because he loves history and he loves Gettysburg. Good. And I know he's up in college, but I know he'll love reading it once I'm done. He'll get it. So I actually want to finish it before he comes back for Thanksgiving. So
well, thank you so much for having me on and letting me talk about the writers group and the book. I'm just having the best time and I'm full of joy right now. It's been a great experience.
Yeah, and we'll let all of them know I love the book. And
I will.
I hope others will read it and get it. And like I said, it's going to a good cause. So it's like, you're going to have a good read and you're helping support future generations of writers. And we need that. So
we sure do. Probably now more than ever.
Yeah, storytelling is key to life. I mean, it's part of like what makes life fun. It's like hearing the stories, and we're losing that. So we need more of it. But
so you get to work on your book.
I will. I promise.
And I'll flip it, and maybe I can come on the podcast, your podcast, but I'll interview you about your book.
There you go. Ooh, I like it.
Ooh,
I like that.
You need to think about that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. And those of you watching or listening or however you found us, thank you. And remember to, as always, stay safe and keep searching.
The Fedora Files. Check out Fedora